So, I'm Marcos Lutyens, artist, and there's some questions that I'm going to answer, and I'll just go one by one. Yes, I completely agree, and it's to do with the interaction of humans, animals, plants, in places and spaces, and often relates to the unconscious and to the intuitive side of things. And it's process-based because I view art as a kind of transformative process, a transformative approach, rather than creating, let's say, kind of passive objects that may or may not trigger people. I like to kind of take people by the hand in a way and move them and guide them through a kind of artistic process, which is often performance-based or rooted in kind of performance or experience. Often the expertise needed in my work involves a lot of different disciplines. So whenever needed, I reach out to a professional to help kind of round out projects to see how best they should be developed, and to seek their guidance and, sometimes also their collaboration. The work that I do, I feel, is like a stepping stone from one project to another, and they're all kind of linked together. And I recently published a monograph with the Alberta Pani Gallery, and I divided all my projects into 4 quadrants, one of 4 quadrants, each project related to one quadrant. So starting from one area, one quadrant, which I call inductive, which I represent with the color blue, which represents the internal aspect of oneself. And then the second quadrant would be the sensory, which is basically on the peripheries of the body, how we relate to the outside world through our senses. And then the third quadrant is the social quadrant, which is how the body, the interior, and the senses relate to the world around us, the people around us. And the fourth quadrant is the environmental quadrant, which comprises all the kind of aspects of setting, which could be urban, but mostly I envision them to be plants, animals, the wider landscape, and the landscape beyond the planet too, which would be the stars and beyond. Most of my work is kind of healing-centric, and I have been very inspired by shamanism, different cultures. And in more primary cultures, the work of the artist is actually related to healing and to aspects of the spirit in the body. The shaman would be the spiritual guide, talking to the gods, or facilitating the communication with the gods. The medicine person providing the plant medicines or otherwise to heal the body, and also the kind of creative force within a tribe. And I think what's happened in our society, in our civilization, is that these 3 aspects have been specialized. So basically the priest has become the kind of mediator of the spirit, and by and large we as an individual aren't kind of authorized to speak directly to God. We have to do it through an intermediary. And the second specialization is doctors. Doctors do amazing work around the world, but often their work is related just to the body, and people forget about the kind of link between psycho and soma. And the third over-specialization has been the artist, who's been kind of pulled away from acting as a kind of spiritual guide and as a healer of the body, to be, in a way, still a creative force, but, sometimes kind of like the decorator. So in my model, we want to kind of draw those three things together. That's why a lot of my work is process-based. I believe that artwork needs to be felt from the inside. And to get to the inside of a viewer, of somebody coming to see the work, it needs to be more than just, briefly looking at something. I think you need to observe something, or be given the time to sink into something, get beneath the skin of something. So that's why I'd say that I work with performance art a lot, and particularly hypnosis a lot, to allow viewers or visitors to get under the skin of what's being shared and to really explore these aspects from within themselves in a kind of creative way, as a creative response from themselves. So in a way, I'm asking more of the audience, but I think the audience is receiving more and getting more for themselves. On the whole, I'm interested in the large themes that can take many years to resolve. And I'm inspired actually by challenges and problems. Here in California, we have these large oil rigs that need to be decommissioned, and to see how best they could be decommissioned and even used to preserve new ecologies and perhaps preserve stories. That project relates to some work that I did for an exhibition at the Alberta Bane Gallery called Island Art, where I presented the premise of moving an oil rig to one of these low-lying nations in the Western Pacific, where the oil rig could actually, as sea level rises, the oil rig could actually help to sustain life and nationhood as well. So when I think of the audience in a performance, in the context of a performance, what I like the audience to do is to be engaged. Sometimes, for instance, in my hypnosis inductions, I guide them to a place where they're imagining something, which is perhaps the first step of kind of creation. Your mind is building something inside itself. Then, with that imagination, I'm asking them to concretize it into a form, a shape. Something, it could be something like this inside your mind that has color, shape, texture, form. And then, so basically you're concretizing something in your brain. And then as another step, perhaps the third step, is I ask them with their eyes closed to perhaps draw or sketch what's in their mind's eye. And then a fourth step is sometimes working with clay, where I get their hands to model what's in their mind's eye. So they're basically externalizing something that's deep inside themselves. A general aspect of these performances that I understood when I was working with 7,000 people at Documenta over 100 days and did 340 performances was that I was actually becoming the visitor. In this particular case, I realized that I was visiting all the people that were coming to see me. The reason why I was visiting the people was because during the sessions or after the sessions, I would ask each person what their experience was and what they sensed and felt. The location is very important in performances. Often I use the location itself to cue certain feelings, sensations. For instance, recently I did a performance at the Museo de Arte Orientale in Torino, and it's a beautiful palace, and I included some of the architecture of the palace into the inductions. I've worked in a lot of different places, the Esplanade of the Pompidou Center, a project called In Touch with the Alberto Pane Gallery, supporting that in the Pompidou Center. And this was to do with this orientation sensing and how people were moving around in the piazza, driven by a kind of unconscious sense of direction that they had. Those are some examples of how place inspires a type of approach to the performances. Yes, this is a studio I've been building in the kind of compound where I live in Los Angeles. The studio is kind of nestled within the gardens. So it's kind of work in progress. It hasn't yet been finished, but it should be finished in the next couple of months. And what I wanted to preserve was this idea of being close to kind of nature and the natural surroundings. I think often artists find themselves in over kind of industrialized spaces, and this kind of reflects on their mindset when they make their work, even if their work might be about nature or about natural things. If they're basically surrounded by concrete and industrial building spaces, there's something of that kind of stays with the work. I also have a yurt where I do my inductions when visitors come. If there's a studio visit, I like ideally to combine it with a hypnotic induction so that whoever's visiting isn't just intellectualizing what they are experiencing, but they sense it from a deep unconscious place, and that they can understand what the essence of the work is about at a deeper level. Yes, I mean, I've worked in terms of human well-being. I was driven by my interest in shamanism and the healing aspect of shamanism, and I found that hypnosis was equivalent to a psychedelic healing process. In the last 2 years specifically, I've worked a lot with memorialization of COVID. From about March 2020, which was the lockdown, I started doing these Zoom hypnosis. Soon after that, I started this project called the Rose River Memorial. The idea was to find a way to memorialize the people that had died from COVID, working with the community to create felt roses and make one felt rose for each person that had died from COVID. The fact that so many people died meant that it was very difficult to produce 1 million roses. So I've transitioned the memorialization process to collaborate with a group, a non-profit group called Marked by COVID, to create a memorialization across the United States and possibly across the world. This COVID memorial project may extend, from now into 5-10 year project or more, and the main thing is to have patience and to kind of buckle down and realize that that sometimes you really have to focus deeper and longer to get really worthwhile things done. We are actually going to launch the first version of this COVID memorial on November 1st in San Francisco. And then next year we're going to launch it in 12 different cities across the United States. And we've already had our first commission to do a permanent memorial in New Mexico, as the governor of New Mexico invited us to do that. I think it's very healthy for us to memorialize and to take stock of what's been going on and to see, as an artist, to see what can be done to help the situation. Another long-term project is this project to do with oil rigs, which I started at the Alberto Pane Gallery, and which now I'm working with the Orange County Museum of Art to explore further this idea of what's going on with the oil rigs. There's also a project that I've been working on called the Centering Center, and it's a project that involves architecture and architectural form and what I call kind of inductive space. The last thing is this project with the stroke patients. It's also a long-term project of, I've also been working with autistic children to see how we can reconnect parts of the brain and also take into account neurodiversity, where people with different mental abilities and capacities and ways of seeing things are also acknowledged, and perhaps they can share certain things that let's say neuronormal people wouldn't otherwise understand or capture. So those are some of the projects and activities that I'm working on.